It's just so lovely to see everyone's smiling face. Thank you for being here today, friends. And people that listen to the video later, because these are accessed frequently, we love you too. And we're glad that you're with us via the digital world. So with that, one of the promises I have made to Jason is that I'm going to keep us on time. So with that, I'm going to start and say, welcome, friends, to our 151st online gathering for congregational leaders across the country. This weekly gathering is called Courageous Leadership, and it's sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I am Jill Beverlin. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the program manager for this ministry and one of your facilitators today. So if you missed last week, I encourage you to go to our website and watch the video. We had so much fun, and Jason did such a good job of putting together some great clips to help us remember how this all started. And we also heard an inspired word of affirmation from Bishop Eaton herself. So you don't want to miss that either. So for today, as we begin, I want to rename our commitment to the truth and healing movement of the ELCA. And as such, I would like you to know that my home is located on the Fox River in Appleton, Wisconsin. This area is the ancestral territory of 5 nations of Native Indigenous peoples: the Menominee tribe, the Ho-Chunk Winnebago tribe, the Potawatomi tribe, the Oneida tribe, and the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans and the Brothertown community. I honor and respect the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this territory on which I live. So as we step into our time today, I also encourage us to remember that we are seeking to create a safer and braver space in these gatherings for you to bring the truth of who you are and how you are doing. These conversations are meant to be an intentional step to live more fully into God's dream for us as the body of Christ. And again, welcome, friends. So it is fall. September is here. And in addition to bringing out all things pumpkin and me putting up my fall decorations on September 15th, that's like a tradition, right? We also think about stewardship campaigns. A long-standing paradigm in our denomination has been incorporating talk about stewardship alongside the excitement of gearing up for fall programming. And also, it's a logical time for us to begin thinking about budget needs for the coming year. However, a more recent teaching has encouraged us to think about stewardship at all seasons of the year, recognizing God's generosity and how that generosity flows to us and how it has the potential to flow through us each and every day. And our guest speaker today believes that the power of story can have a huge impact on what this looks like and how it can happen in our faith communities. So with this as a backdrop, I am so happy to introduce to you my friend and colleague, the Reverend Tim Brown, Director of Congregational Stewardship for the ELCA. Tim, Jason has shared some fun stuff about you in our invitation for today, but I would also like to add, and I think I've said this before in this space, that you have impeccable taste in 70s music. And also your knowledge and writing about Christian saints that you post daily on Facebook has been a beautiful resource for me personally and for many others in learning the many faces of God in our world. So Tim, with that, welcome to our Courageous Leadership space.
Thank you, Jill. Really appreciate it. And you would be happy to know that I was at the vinyl store last week and I bought a vinyl. I don't usually buy compilation albums, but this vinyl is called The Essential Yacht Rock, and it's all 70s and Kenny Loggins and really, really great stuff. So good to be with you all here. I'm going to do just a little bit of introduction of myself, then we're going to do a devotion. I know we're going to go into a breakout room or two. And for the devotion, I'm going to talk a little bit about the saints. And I meant to post a saint yesterday, but I didn't get a chance to. Yesterday, I would lobby hard that the church celebrate Saint Johnny of the Caches. He died on September 12th. And actually a really fascinating life of that individual. But my name is Tim, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been with you once before. I have 2 sons, Alistair, who's a soccer star, and he says if that doesn't work out for his life trajectory, he's going to go to medical school. So I think either way, I'm pretty good into my later years. And my older son, Finley, just started baseball season yesterday. He plays for the Marlins and is the catcher and enjoys it immensely. Yes, Michael Judge, I wrote up a thing about him, Mark. I don't know if you follow me or we're friends on Facebook, but you can see it there. But my wife, Rhonda, is a professor of biology at William Peace University, a small liberal arts college here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And for the devotion today, I'm actually going to share the saint of today. Does anybody know the saint of today? All right. Well, it is none other than St. John Chrysostom.
Yep.
Fun name. Interesting life. And so using this as the saint of the day, we're going to actually just delve a little bit into some questions around him. But I'm going to go ahead and read the post that I wrote for St. John today. In the second half of the 4th century, the world was blessed with a preacher still unsurpassed in eloquence, and today is his feast day, St. John Chrysostom, Bishop of Constantinople. St. Chrysostom, which literally means golden-mouthed, was born in Antioch and trained under the famous philosopher Libanius, who named him brilliant, and the biblical scholar Diodorus. And though Libanius wanted him to become a lawyer, John chose the more secure but less lucrative route of ministry, and was baptized at the Easter Vigil in 368 at the age of 18. He lived as a hermit for a while, contemplating, the life of contemplation, but was finally ordained into the priesthood and served the Bishop of Antioch, Flavian. He became famous for his sermons, as he preached with the scriptures in one hand and the headlines in the other, to borrow a popular phrase. His sermons were thematic and contemporary, addressing topics like social justice, the equality of women in society, his opposition to slavery, and emphasizing the role of lay people in worship and the church. He even did a whole series on toppling statues, as the people of Antioch had rioted and destroyed some statues of the emperor, which is pretty timely, if you ask me. In 398, St. Chrysostom was chosen, he was surprisingly chosen to become Bishop of Constantinople, or is it Istanbul? Only they might be giants to know. This was an important, consequential post in the church. He won the people's affection for his simplicity, honesty, and clarity in eloquent sermons. Unfortunately, these qualities also caused many people to despise him. If he were around today, he'd have gotten many terse emails. He refused to play political games. He had no problem ousting clergy and deacons for murder, adultery, and the like. In 403, the Empress and Theophilus of Alexandria conspired to take down his popular and principal prelate at a conference called the Synod of the Yoke. There they condemned St. Chrysostom. They brought him up on false charges of heresy, and he was officially banished from the city. The people were outraged and riotous, and coincidentally, the Empress herself had a personal tragedy in her life. And all of these events were taken by religious leaders as signs from God that they had made a big mistake. And so they brought St. Chrysostom out of exile. But because he wouldn't admit any wrongdoing, they prevented him from taking his seat at the cathedral. Still, John had enormous pull, and on the Easter Vigil, 3,000 converts came to the Baths of Constantine for baptism that year. And even that turned into a riot. Soldiers had to break it up, and some were killed. Unable to control the people with his golden-tongued popular prophet around, John was once again exiled, this time to Armenia. He continued to write, however, and was able to be enormously influential, even in exile, as he corresponded with his friends back in Constantinople. Pope Innocent I finally was prompted to get involved and, following the people's lead, supported his bishop. He condemned the Synod of the Yoke as illegal, and when he sent papal envoys to Constantinople to investigate the ordeal, his envoys were treated poorly, and some were even jailed and sent back to Rome, and that made him furious. So in retaliation for the Pope's intrusion into this matter, the emperor and St. Chrysostom further exiled and moved to an even more remote location. Having been given orders to vacate Armenia and move to the isolated Pityus, John took up his cross on foot, bareheaded, and he began the walk that would be his last. He died at Comana in Pontus, never reaching Pityus. And in his last breath, he said, "Glory to God for all things." His grave is in the choir chapel at St. Peter's Basilica. I don't know if you've ever been. He is still remembered as the most eloquent preacher the church has ever produced, even now. And his Christmas sermon is still preached by many faithful clergy every year. It's a good way to, if you have a Christmas Day service, not have to write another sermon. Just preach this one. I'm serious. It's a great one. St. Chrysostom is a reminder for me and for the church of a few things. First, a sermon isn't worth its salt if it doesn't say something that connects God's promises to the headlines of the day. And secondly, every good pastor prophet who does the above will have enemies. Sometimes, unfortunately, those enemies are close to home. Indeed, it's always been so, but the work continues. So as we go into our breakout rooms to have just a mini discussion, I'm going to put just a couple of things in the chat for questions for pondering or for discussion. So the first one is, how do you hold the scriptures and the headlines together in your work? And that doesn't just mean in preaching, right? You don't always all have to be pastors. And the second one, which follows closely on those heels, how do you process criticism? All right. Well, speaking of feast days, does anybody know what tomorrow's is? It's the strangest one. It's the Holy Cross Day. So it's not even.
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah,
Tomorrow's also Rosh Hashanah.
It's not even a person. I know. Every once in a while, these align really interestingly, which is really fun. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about narrative budgets and what they are and why they are. So just curious, how many of us in the room are rostered leaders?
Right here.
How many of us in the room are responsible for creating some sort of budget somewhere? All right. I want to say today is not going to be just for rostered leaders, even if you're not, and it's not going to be just for folks who have to create a budget of some sort, because the underlying principle underneath a narrative budget is you're showing stories of impact. And so even in coaching, one of the things that I do when I talk to folks about, why they might choose me as a coach is I talk about stories of impact, right? And ways that we shape lives with the work that we do. When it comes into a budgetary thing, we shape lives with the fuel that we spend on the ministry areas. And I'm going to use different words for different things because I'd like to tell the truth. And so when I say when we use money to fund things, that's not the truth. The truth is we have fuel that moves ministry along. That's the truth. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And you might be saying, yeah, that's just a semantic game. And I want to lift up for you, I use this all the time, this example. It's not semantics, it's truth. So if you can imagine a house on a cul-de-sac right now, just imagine that in your mind. You see a house in a cul-de-sac, right? You have it. I say, okay, so that's not a house, actually, that's my home. Does that change things a little bit? And if I do it again, I say, actually, that's where I'm raising my babies, right? Where I'm making a life. That last one is the truth. They're all facts, but that last one is the truth. This is why poetry is so important in our lives. Poetry holds truth that plain prose just can't hold, that bare facts just can't hold. And a narrative budget, to me, is the poetry of a line item budget. It holds truths that a line item budget just can't hold. So what is a narrative budget? I'm going to share my screen again, show you just a couple of different examples of what a narrative budget is. A narrative budget, beloved, can everyone see? I'm going to change the screen one more time in just a second. But a narrative budget does a couple of things. A narrative budget tells the tells the qualitative story, not the quantitative story. The qualitative story is the one that shows impact. The quantitative story says 9 kids were in Sunday school this year. Now that tells me nothing about Sunday school. It tells me that you have it. It tells me that you had 9 kids in it. But a narrative budget will tell the qualitative story. And the qualitative story would be something like you quote Susan, and Susan said that this year I learned stories about Jesus I never knew before. Now that tells me about your Sunday school. Now, can everyone see side by side the line item budget and the narrative budget? I just switched screens. Is it up there? All right, great. So if you see a line item budget, pretty simple. You all recognize this, right? You have the line item and how much you spend, income-wise, reserves, and then expenses, right? The other side is the narrative budget. And the narrative budget takes that line item budget, cuts it up into different ministry areas, hopefully pertaining to your mission statement. I was working with the church not too long ago, and their mission statement was something like reaching out in God's love to change the world with justice, faith, and hope, right? And so when they created their narrative budget, we had a reaching out in God's love, and then we had a justice, faith, and hope, right? So nurturing or empowering justice, nurturing faith, nurturing hope. And we took their budget and we cut it up into those focus areas because that's their mission statement. And a narrative budget tells how the ministry fuel, the money that comes in, the offerings that come in, are actually doing the things that you feel God is calling you to do. So it's not semantics, it's truth. So in this narrative budget, you can see there are a couple of different things I'm going to point out, but you can see worship ministry, learning ministry, caring ministry, reaching out ministry. This is their focus areas, and hopefully their mission statement said something around that. But they did a little description around each of them, and they kind of figured out how much they spend on each area. The senior pastor's salary is cut up into all those areas. The admin's cut up into many of those areas. The youth and family director is cut up into a couple of those areas. Their mission outpost, and we'll discuss what that is, but you might know that better as a building, is cut up into many of those areas. And they have percentages near it so that you can see exactly how much of their ministry time and energy is spent fulfilling God's mission for them. And they have pictures of their ministry in action next to it so that they can see faces they recognize, faces they know. These are not stock photos. This was actually of the church. So they can see their faith in action. And when they go to approve the mission plan, you might know that better as a budget, for next year, they can see how they've been doing and what they want to do next. It gives a snapshot, a glimpse into ministry impact, lives changed. All right, before I move on to the next one, any questions? Because I'm going to give you my top 10 tips for how to construct a narrative budget, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But any questions so far? All right. Hi ho, to top 10 list we go. All right. So you'll see here, and I don't put it in animation form because I always lose track of where I am. So I'm just going to do it in this form if that's okay, everyone. But you see here, top 10 narrative budget tips with appreciation for David Letterman. And when you're constructing your narrative budget, these are, I think, top 10 best practices. All right. Ready, number 10. Know why you're doing a narrative budget. Be very clear about it. Tell your staff why you're doing it. Tell your council why you're doing it. Tell the congregation why you're doing it. Because if people are used to seeing the line item budget only, they're going to be like, whoa, 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 what is this? Narrative budgets tell the qualitative story, not just a quantitative story. Narrative budgets are honest about impact, not just cost. And for an economic system, especially for us in the Northern Hemisphere, in the Americas, where we are right now, the United States of America, we are obsessed with cost. And I think the church can live into its radical nature, its Jesus-called nature, by being obsessed with impact. not costs. How lives are changed because of this. And narrative budgets don't hide costs. They reveal mission priorities. That's especially true with those percentages that I saw. All right. So top 10 list, number 10, be clear on why you're doing it. Narrative budgets are a ministry snapshot for a world in need of pictures of impact and hope. Okay. Number 9, mission statements are meant to be plumb lines, not just nice sentiments. Hopefully, you know the mission statement of your community or your congregation. And so when you're looking to create those ministry categories that you're going to use to create that narrative budget, hopefully you're going to build the narrative budget around that as much as possible. I tell folks all the time to come back to their mission statement again and again and again. It should be in the bulletin. It should be on your email blast. It should be at the top of your social media feed. It's not just an elevator pitch. We don't do elevator pitch. It's a missional statement. It's what you're going to do by God, right? Tip number 8, create ministry areas and assign line items where they fit. So you're going to take those ministry areas and then you're going to look at that budget that you have. You're just going to cut it up. And this is where especially Enneagram 1s get really, really kind of obsessed. And they need an Enneagram 3 like myself, or even better, an Enneagram 7, who even drives me crazy, to say it's okay if the numbers aren't exact. Because with a narrative budget, the point is not the numbers. The point is the story. The point is the impact. So round numbers are fine. Round numbers are fine. Approximate numbers are fine. You know, however that needs to be, I want you to know it's okay to have it be round and approximate. Don't get overly hung up on hand-wringing details. It can stop you from doing things. But I'm going to give you just an example of the way that I practically do this when I create a narrative budget. So St. Jude by the Butterfly Preserve is creating a narrative budget. And so you see, this is part of their line item here. They have youth and family ministries, and it's coded in blue. And then they have worship ministries is coded in purple. And there'll be numbers assigned to this of how much they spend every year. And in their ministry categories, what I used to do is I would color code them so that I could figure out where I'm doing it or where I'm putting things, right? And even for my salary and my benefits, I would split it up and color code it, how it entered into all of those areas, because I had pieces of all these areas, right? Tip number 7, use your staff as a resource, and not just paid staff, volunteer staff, or even council members. Ask your staff to audit their time and figure out how they split up their ministry across the ministry areas, and then you do the same. Rough estimates are okay. If you do that for them, you're not empowering them to have some agency in this process. So have them do it. It's a great way to have a conversation about why you're doing a narrative budget instead of just a line item budget. Have them do it with you if you need to. And for volunteer staff, like even council members, one of the things that I would do, especially when I was in my first church, which is a smaller church in inner city Chicago, we could have council members, and I'd have them budget how much time they were spending. And then at the very end of the narrative budget, I would put volunteer hours and approximate cost that would be if we were paying for it. And you can look that up online. The IRS has a volunteer hours to cost a site where you can see where that is, so that people can see, you know, we're doing a million things. We're doing tons of things. We're making tons of impact. Skip tip number 6. Tip number 6. So then you do the audit yourself, and then you do it on your ministry outposts. We're going to talk a little bit on this for a second. Remember that example I had about the house, and then it's my home, and then it's where I'm raising my babies or making a life, right? People get so down on church buildings because buildings are expensive. And a lot of times our church buildings were built for a congregation that no longer exists. And these things are true, right? But what is also true is that your church building is not just a building. It's your ministry outpost. It's where you're doing your work of gathering around the word and the sacrament to be filled, and then leaving to go out into the community to live that out. And then you come back and then you leave, and then you come back and you leave. And sometimes you do it multiple times a week. And you see this movement here, it's like breath. It's like a heart beating. If you can imagine your building as being kind of an epicenter for breath in the community, for the heart of the community, that might change the way you think about that electric bill. Because your electric bill is not really an electric bill. It's providing light so that children can hear stories about Jesus after the sun's gone down. Your AC unit is not your AC unit. It's providing an atmosphere where people can hear stories about Jesus without being disrupted because it's too hot or too cold. Tell the truth. That's the truth. So think honestly about your building usage. Distribute this among the ministry areas. And I would absolutely tell you right now, if I had to wave a wand as director of congregational stewardship, I would change everybody's, building line items to ministry outpost line items. Just do it now. Because it's not semantics, it's truth. And there may become a time when you wonder if this ministry outpost is the right size and the right place for you. And that's totally great. I think you should have those conversations. But the minute you start calling it a building again, you've downgraded it. It's a ministry outpost. Tip number 5. Take your ministry staff, volunteer and paid, and have them figure out where they spend their time, then put it in percentages. So that audit that we did before, I'm going to encourage you to have them split up their time and then do it percentage-wise. How much of their time are they spending on different ministry areas? Because you can see how amazing your impact is and how many lives your folks impact when you do it. And you do more than you think you do. And this is one way to see it. And this also engages people who learn differently or who process things differently. A line item budget, only addresses the kind of people who are in love with numbers, right? But a narrative budget addresses folks who are in love with numbers, who are in love with percentages, who are in love with stories. It hits all of them. And that way it engages all of them instead of just one type of folk. Just for an example of this, this is how it might look. This church has a lot of staff. You might not have as much staff, but you see how this is. They cut it up into those ministry areas that I was showing before. And then Pastor Sally, senior pastor, split up her area. Pastor Joe, associate, he split up his area. Director of parish life. And they kind of just put it all together, right? It gives a different snapshot of where they're spending their time. Tip number 4. Let's say all this is really, really daunting. For somebody in your church, it is going to be the thrill of their life to do this with you, right? You don't know an accountant? I bet you do. If this is daunting, find someone to help you do this work. Somebody on council, an accountant in the church, somebody who can help look at these numbers, put it in Excel because you hate Excel. Great. Find somebody who will do it for you. They're super easy. This one time I photocopied directories and passed it out to the stewardship team. And I said, hey, we're going to split this up and then you're going to email these people. And one guy in the room says, wait, we're going to physically email each of these people, like type in an email just on one of them. I was like, yeah. He goes, how about I just put this all in a blast and we can each do a blast of emails? I was like, oh, that's a much better idea. I wish you'd said that earlier. It saved a lot of paper. You know someone who can help you do this. Use them. Engage them in the ministry. Tip number 3. Pie charts, bar charts, Venn diagrams. Oh my! Charts provide a visual aid of understanding your impact, so include charts in there. Charts are really fun too. Charts allow folks of all learning abilities to see what you mean. And here's an example. So this is all those numbers that I just showed you before. You stick it in Excel and then you say, hey, make a pie chart for me. And this is what it does. Pretty amazing. And you can see, St. Jude's by the Butterfly Preserve, spend, I would say a little more, maybe almost 40%, 33% on partner ministries, quarter on faith formation, quarter on worship, 15% care and outreach, and the rest on ministry support. You can see in a snapshot, a glimpse. And then you can have a hard conversation about, is this where we want our ministry field to go? Is this where we want it to be? It's a good conversation to have. Tip number 2, show the story in images, smiley, happy people holding hands, and use real photos of real ministry happening, not like this presentation, which shows nicely manicured folks. Otherwise, this would have been all about my kids, and I don't want to do that to you. So show real ministry that's happening with real people. Get their permission, of course, first. And don't shy away from the folks that are in your community and showing them. If you use stock images to project a community that you don't have, you're not telling the truth. Tell the truth about your folks. It's okay. Because I'll tell you what, if they see your people doing ministry, they're going to recognize Judy, and they're going to recognize Sam, and they're going to recognize Jaquan, and they're going to know those folks. And that's going to make the narrative even more compelling. Then my number 1 tip. Well, that's a thank you. My number 1 tip, have the line item budget on hand. You don't throw it away. You don't hide it. I always stuck it on the back, right? Because people are going to want to see the works cited, right? They're going to want to see how you got to where you are. And so the line item budget will be there, but the narrative budget will be the meat of the story. The line item budget will be the cliff notes, the addendum, the last part, so they can see how you got where you are. And there are going to be some folks that really want to see that line item budget. It's what they're used to. Great. Totally fine. Have it there for them. But for everybody else, tell the story of impact, not just cost. One final word on narrative budgets, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. When narrative budgets work, it's not because you've done amazing things. Narrative budgets work because the truth is amazing things are happening all the time and we just don't notice them. And so it forces us to see them and to pick them out. My council hated me at my last church because at the beginning, and I say that tongue in cheek, I don't think all of them hated me. Some of them did. But at the beginning of council meeting, I would say, okay, we're just going to go around. Who saw somebody doing something really cool in church today, or this week, or this month even, right? And so they'd have to think, and they'd say, well, that choir anthem was really great. Or they would say that kid acolyted for the first time and they did a great job. Or they would say, I noticed somebody helping somebody out of their car and that was really neat, right? So they would do all these things. They would say all these things. And then I would say, okay, so now what we're going to do is you're going to send them an email, a text, or a phone call right now and tell them thank you. And you notice they were doing something cool. And so we'd spend the next 10 minutes doing that. And the reason we did this is so that we would begin to train ourselves to notice the amazing things happening around us. And when we started to do that, creating the narrative budget was not hard because amazing things were happening all the time. Impact was happening all the time. We just trained ourselves to be in robot mode and never notice it. Narrative budget is the collection of all those stories that comes together. So if you're saying to yourself, my community doesn't do anything amazing, I don't know what I'd write about, I would challenge you to just start practicing noticing. Just start practicing noticing. What was something cool you saw? What was an anthem that touched your heart? What was somebody doing something that was unexpected? And I bet you're doing more amazing things than you think you will. All right. I'm going to open it up to questions, thoughts. But before I do that, two final things. One, at the end of November, right before Advent, or like the Monday of Advent, starting right before St. Andrew's Day, which is the 30th of November, by the way. It's kickoff of Advent. I'm going to be leading a webinar that's a practical how-to on creating a narrative budget, where I'll take you step by step, and you can bring your budget with you, and you can do it. And I'll be giving a Zoom link and everything like that in this next Where Your Heart Is, which is the Stewardship newsletter. And the second thing, if you're wanting to talk a little bit differently about stewardship and noticing, we do have a program through the Lake Institute called Cultivating Generous Congregations. And we have a fall cohort coming up starting October 10th. It's for 6 weeks. 4 of those are active on Zoom. You do it as a church committee, a council of up to 4 folks can do it. together, and I invite you to consider that. And if you're interested in that, I'm going to put my email in the chat bar, and you can contact me, and I'll give you details. All right, let's open it up. Thoughts, questions, concerns. Also, I will take criticism, just like St. John Chrysostom, and pick up my cross and walk.
This is Christy. I just want to
I really like that idea about like having people regularly notice things. I think storytelling takes practice. And I think that's something we sometimes forget, is that, you know, no good writer like writes a great novel the first time. Like, it takes lots of practice to be able to do that, you know. And was it Neil Gaiman talks about, you know, when you rewrite stuff, it's making it look like you did it perfect the first time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. And you know, one of my favorite Neil Gaiman stories is at one of his book signings, he went to the bookstore and nobody showed up. Even as famous as he is, nobody showed up. And that's all to remember, that even those who are amazing and successful, every once in a while they have a bust, and that's okay too, right? But I love that. Practice noticing. Think of ways you can do that, right? Sister Rivera Mendez had a question.
no, I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you, because I really enjoyed your presentation about the narrative budget, because it really tells a true story, like you said, about the congregation. I think people would get more excited about the mission of the church if they saw a narrative and they saw themselves in those pictures. I think that makes a big difference, telling the story. I think I like that. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for saying that. And I'll tell you, when we switched from a line item budget to a narrative budget, people looked forward to annual meetings because they were celebrations.
Yeah.
You know, and they weren't like, this should be, you know, it wasn't like a business meeting. It was like a family reunion. It was like looking back over the year. It was like that thing on social media where they say, here are your memories, look at your year. That's what it was. And then we got excited about what God was calling us to do the next year. And so we'd say, this was this last year. Here are the cool things we're going to do this year. This is how much of ministry fuel it's going to take. And I invite you to invest in it. So, yeah.
We believe fellowship and living in the community of saints here, and we always post a picture in a column in the newsletter, and 1 month it was a perfectly toasted marshmallow from our S'mores and Moors gathering. Love it.
Yes.
Yeah.
What a cool image too. And you know, if I were there in your community and I had the ability to make decisions, I'd probably make that the cover of the Pentecost bulletin. But you see, there are different ways that you can use these things, right? When you start noticing, you know, and a narrative budget is, here are the cool things I've noticed. Here are the cool things we've noticed. Here are the lives that have been changed this last year. You know, that's exactly right. I love it.
Well, I also think it feeds into the annual reports, you know, when every committee has to do what we did, you know, I think if you're able to do a narrative budget, it helps it make the other reports in your annual report more narrative, because then they're getting that practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, Pastor, one of the things that I asked folks to do, and not all of them did it, but if they had to do one of those little reports on what their, you know, ministry team or committee was doing, I said, I don't want to know what you did. I just want quotes. Give me a list of quotes of people who participated in whatever it was and how it affected them, how it changed their lives. That's all I want. And some folks did, you know, the regular quantitative stuff. But some folks did just a list of quotes. I was working with a church last night, and they're kind of lamenting the fact that they don't have many youth in their church. And one of the things that they were sent to do was go do some interviews. And one of them interviewed the youngest member of their church, who's not super young. And they said, what are your favorite things about this church? And she said, I get to interact with Alicia, and then Juan talks to me about music and art and, you know, all these things. And she talked about all of these folks who were her grandparents' age, who she gets to chill with and she gets to meet. And I said, why are you so worried about getting young people when the youngest person in the congregation is so grateful to have you? Quotes are so powerful. So powerful. And they walked away saying, maybe we're not a church for young families. Maybe we're a church for empty nesters. And every once in a while, that teen will come in and really need that in their lives. We'll be there for them. You know, lots of things.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of I never put words to what that is. I love the storytelling aspect, but to envision a narrative budget, that is just awesome. I've often been known as a thorn in people's sides when I sit at council meetings and start dreaming and visioning. And one of the things I can see right now is that the tools that we have on our hands now, thanks to technology, is a great way to be able to share stories. If you have screens in your sanctuary on Sunday mornings, have some pictures up there, your quotes, your little things. But the one congregation that I worked in, that was very successful as Stewardship. We didn't use this word narrative, but we used the themes over a period of about 8 weeks of time, treasure, time, talent, treasure, and caring. And each week at each worship, we had 2 worship services every Sunday and during our faith formation time. I found people who would share about time for the first 2 weeks, and they would share a story about how they spend their time. I mean, people in the congregation had no idea, and they shared those stories during worship. And they had no idea that the choir director delivered pizzas every Wednesday to the food pantry. I mean, there were stories going. And then when it came to time, talent, treasure, and then the caring, we shared stories about caring for one another. And there's about 10 different stories I could share. But to put the word narrative on this really, really is so helpful. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, you were creating in real time a narrative budget. Or a narrative impact story, right? And to add the budget or the mission plan next to that, you just put dollar signs next to, how your community was living that out through the ministry fuel that's there.
Yeah, well, the budget that year went up 33%.
Yeah. One of the truths, and this is a general truth, and we know this is a general truth because I've seen it time and time again, generosity begets generosity. So if you tell stories about people being generous, or if they share stories of why they're generous, it encourages you to be generous. I've had many stewardship folks tell me why I should give more, but they never said why they give more. And all I want to hear is why they give more, because that's going to do something that them telling me what to do isn't going to do. It's going to coax me into alignment with them. Now, C.S. Lewis said something true in the Screw Tape Letters, where the Wormwood is really lamenting that God never coerces, God only coaxes. And it'd be so much easier if God coerced, because then you can just turn people against God, because who wants to be forced to do something? But God coaxes instead. God makes you fall in love instead of tells you what to do. And if we can help people fall in love with mission, they're going to want to align. They're going to want to invest. Other questions, even practical questions, like even how-tos, we can go there if we need to.
So Tim, this is a practical question from a colleague. I'm wondering how we can, first of all, I'm wondering how many people in the room, and just raise your hand, does it feel daunting to put together something as beautiful as what Tim displayed in the example? It doesn't feel daunting to you? Okay, I'm the only one in the room that goes, oh my goodness, I'm so grateful that Jason and David are on my team, because there's no way I could put that together on myself. I love Excel, but I know nothing of how to empower all of the gadgets and the wisdom of Excel, right? And so I'm just wondering, for those that maybe listen to this recording later, then, since all of you can do exactly what Tim did, and I'm Maybe I should just ask some of you in the room then to help me with my things that I need if David and Jason are busy. But I'm wondering, how could we empower like a cache of people that do have that expertise, that if there happens to be a faith community that they don't have someone that can do that? I mean, maybe my thinking is wrong, but I think it's important that I've said this out loud so you can react back to this, Tim, because I think that can be enough to shut someone down from thinking they can do this.
Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. That's a great question. So one of the things, because I'm not great at Excel, by the way. I don't excel at Excel. I don't like it. It's a different language to me. You know, my wife is great at Excel. She loves it. It's her jam, right? So I would often just ask her to help me out. But if she was not there, one of the things I would probably do is go to somebody in the church, and maybe they don't know, but maybe their kid does. Or maybe somebody at their work does. I mean, we have a wider community than we think, especially if we're thinking only within the walls of a mission outpost. I mean, mission outposts are only good if you go out into the community. Otherwise, it's just a home, right? Or a base. So what you want to do is think imaginatively, and even say, do you know how to do this? If you don't know how to do this, do you know somebody who knows how to do this? And, you know, you don't always have to pay folks because they want to help. A lot of times folks want to help, and it's not that hard. That's the other thing. It's not that hard. So it looks hard to me, like I don't love it. But for somebody who knows Excel, this is like a half hour of their time, and you provide them coffee, pumpkin spice lattes. Yeah, John?
Yeah, one thing I missed in your narrative is I think a lot of our churches cooperate with groups that don't belong to the church, but they work with us. And I assume that should be in such a budget too, with pictures. And even though it's not part of the church's budget, I mean, the heating and maybe cleaning up is, but it's other people that are doing most of the work, but they're using the church to do it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, John. Yeah, and that's always in there. In my budget plan, you would see that part under the partner ministries. That was the part that was in there. And it's actually the biggest part of the budget that was there, or the mission plan. It was the biggest part of the mission plan. You know, it's the daisies that meet at the church. It's the feeding ministries that go out of the church. It's, you know, all of those things. It's the basketball league that meets at the church and how you support them. Because what we would do is, like, so for that basketball league, which I had at my last congregation, we had a basketball league that would meet at the church. And they would use the gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? And so we took our mission outpost bill of heating and cooling, which was pretty expensive at different times of the year. And we would take those line item numbers and we would stick them in there. That's ministry outpost. And we didn't charge the basketball league anything to use our space. They just had to lock up at the end. But they were part of our budget because we paid for a lot of their work. And some of those kids showed up in church random times, right? I mean, that's where you would put that stuff in. Your ministry outpost is a lot of neat stuff. The AA group, you know, your electric bill allows people to tell truths in the basements of your buildings or your ministry outpost that they're not able to say anywhere else, right? That's huge. Now say it that way instead of saying we have an electric bill, because that tells the truth.
We don't even call our line item a budget anymore. We call it our mission spending plan.
Great. Blessings. I love it.
That's changed outlooks too.
It's truth, right? That's truth. Yeah. That's great.
I'm curious if this is happening, this narrative budget is happening at the churchwide office.
Thanks, Tammy. That's a great question. As Director of Congregational Stewardship Support, I have to say that I have not seen a strictly narrative budget this way, but I will say that different areas of impact are doing narrative budgets for their specific areas of impact, including mine. I work with the mission support team, so Victoria, Nick, and myself. We are creating a narrative budget for the kind of work that we do. But I mean, my dream and from your mouth to the divine ears, in 2025, instead of having a line item budget for the churchwide assembly to vote on, it would be a purely narrative budget with a line item on the back. That's what.
I appreciate your work, Tim. I know that. I mean, I know the realities that you're up against, but I think that your message is so important, and so many ministries have been slashed because of finances, even though the impact was incredibly important.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, narrative budgets reframe the way you look at the thing, right? It's not about cost, it's about impact. Yeah.
And Tammy, I can commit to you that the coaching ministry will be telling our story with this narrative budget because of this presentation today. And that's a question that I also want to throw into the room as co-facilitator with my colleague, Tim. I would love to hear what other concrete steps are each of you taking away from this presentation today, because that's part of what we do here in Courageous Leadership is we challenge one another for the presentation to not just be something that makes us go, yeah, we should get on that bandwagon. Let's do it. But to really name, and I'm going to do such and such. So Jason and I have been messaging back and forth, and we already have a plan.
Woohoo!
And Tim's on the leadership team, so he has to hold my feet to that fire too. There's no way for me to wiggle out of that action step, people.
I have been noticing more of what my members, since we're such a small church, of what they've been doing in their scattered ministries. And so I'm committing to writing some of those down.
I love that, Sylvia. Also, I have to say narrative budgets work for a church of any size because it's not about the numbers, it's about the story.
I'm not sure how to identify taped programs, but assuming that they can be found easily, I'll probably ask the person or the people in charge of budget at my congregation to review the program that we've just watched.
Yeah.
I think it's an excellent idea. I know about 2 members of my church that could probably handle it, but the rest of them I'd have to explain it a little further in detail. But to me, it's excellent and it's very easy to present, especially when you're trying to write a grant and they want to see what you're doing. So I think it's wonderful. Thanks very much.
No, thanks, Pastor Felicia. Really appreciate that.
I came in late to the discussion today. Apologize, I had other stuff, but this reminds me, I'm retired now a couple of years, but we approached this with, actually I used the model of Stories in Faith in Action out of ELCA, and we did that. I mean, literally produced a product like that for our congregation and then told stories. I interviewed people, we took pictures, we presented 5 major ministries, right, connected to the community and whatnot as part of the storytelling. But my comment is an action step would be, there's been a lot of talk over the last 30 years about, oh, we need to do 12 months of stewardship, you know, all year long stewardship. And usually it boils down to a 6-week campaign. Nobody knows how to do the 12-month thing. My comment is realize that the narrative budget concept gets real if you say, I'm going to start now for next year. In other words, use all 12 months to figure out how to find the people that can do the Excel, to the photographs, the interviews, all that. Take those action steps month after month after month. And guess what? You've got a 12-month program.
Yeah. I love that. Love that, Johan. Yeah. Just noticing over 12 months and it fills itself out.
So friends, thank you for this time. Tim, your wisdom has been so inspirational, and it'll be really fun to see how many times this recording is hit, because I have a feeling it's going to be shared often. And I also want to point out that our last comment came from the Reverend Dr. Johann Berg, who actually will be our speaker next week, taking the baton about the importance of story and talking with us about the E word, evangelism. And just what is the gospel anyway? And so these two things tie beautifully together, friends. You won't want to miss next week. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, Tim, always a joy to be in the same space.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. And we'll have you back, of course. And friends, as we leave today, I want you to know that you are seen, you are valued, and you are loved. We'll see you next week. God bless you.
Assalamu alaikum.